Iris Moon didn't flinch at the crimson trail snaking across the marble floor of Kangdae's penthouse. She'd seen worse in the ER before her license was stripped away. But this wasn't a sterile hospital room. This was the domain of Seoul's most untouchable man, and the blood belonged to him. She followed the smears past the living room's floor-to-ceiling windows, past the abstract art that cost more than her yearly salary, until she found him slumped against the kitchen island. Kangdae Lee, the Ice King, the man who dismantled corporations with a signature and destroyed lives with a phone call. Now he was just meat and bone, trying to hold his intestines in place with blood-slicked fingers. His gun lay 3 feet away. His eyes tracked her movement with predatory focus, despite the shock setting in. Iris had exactly 4 seconds to decide. Walk away and let Seoul's most dangerous man bleed out on Italian tile, or become the only person alive who'd seen him vulnerable. She grabbed the gun first, kicked it across the floor. "You're going to die if you keep pressing on it like that." His voice came out strangled, barely recognizable. "Who?" "Your ghost." She was already moving, yanking open drawers with practiced efficiency. Vodka from the bar, kitchen shears. The premium suture kit she'd noticed last week while cleaning his bathroom. The man kept medical supplies like he expected this exact scenario. The woman who scrubs your blood off the floors and pretends not to notice the meetings you have at 3 a.m. Now shut up and lie flat before you pass out. Kangdae's laugh was wet, painful, but he obeyed. Iris didn't have time for sterile protocol. She cut away his shirt, ignored the intricate tattoo work covering his ribs, focused only on the knife wound, leaking his life onto her recently mopped floor. Mob hit, probably. Precise. Meant to gut him slowly. The kind of injury that screamed message more than murder. This is going to hurt. She didn't wait for permission before pouring vodka directly into the wound. His body went rigid. The sound he made was inhuman, something between a growl and a scream he was too proud to release. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist hard enough to bruise. For one terrible second, she thought he might kill her for causing him pain. Then his fingers loosened, his breathing steadied, and those black eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her hands shake. "You've done this before." "I used to save lives." She threaded the curved needle, her muscle memory taking over. "Before I started cleaning up after people like you. People like me keep people like you employed. People like you are why I need employment." The first stitch went in clean. His jaw clenched, but he didn't move. "Hold still, unless you want to meet your ancestors tonight." Iris worked in silence, each suture a small rebellion against the fate that had brought her to his door 6 months ago. She'd been invisible then, just another cleaning woman in a city full of them. But invisibility was a luxury that ended the moment you saved a monster's life. When she tied off the final stitch, Kangdae's hand caught hers again, gentler this time, almost reverent. "What's your real name?" She met his gaze without blinking. "Iris, and you're welcome." Detroit didn't die overnight. It bled out slowly, like everything Iris had ever loved. She grew up in the shadow of the Ambassador Bridge, where the air tasted like rust and broken promises. Her brother Marcus was the genius, 16 years old, with hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded, a mind that understood machinery the way prophets understood God. Their father had been a union man at the Ford plant before the layoffs. Their mother cleaned houses in Grosse Pointe, scrubbing toilets for people who wouldn't meet her eyes. Iris learned early that survival meant keeping your head down and your expectations lower. Marcus didn't get that memo. He took a job at the docks, working freight for companies that didn't ask questions. Good money, cash money. The kind that bought their mother's medications and kept the lights on when winter turned their neighborhood into a frozen wasteland. Iris was in pre-med at Wayne State then, riding 2 buses to get to class, studying under streetlights because their apartment's electricity got cut off every other month. She should have seen it coming. The Xinhua Syndicate moved product through Detroit like ghosts. Korean manufacturing fronts, shipping electronics that weighed too much and came wrapped in layers of industrial plastic. Marcus's job was simple: unload containers, ask no questions, cash the checks. But her brother had always been too curious for his own good. He found the guns, crates of them, stamped with serial numbers that didn't exist, destined for cartels in Mexico and warlords in Africa. And because Marcus believed in things like justice and right and wrong, he called the FBI. The feds raided the warehouse on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Marcus was in custody, arrested for weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges the syndicate's lawyers had gift-wrapped for him. The dockworkers who could have testified disappeared. The manifests vanished. Even the FBI agent who'd promised Marcus witness protection transferred to Alaska and stopped returning calls. Iris watched her brother get swallowed by the system, 25 years minimum in a federal cage, while the men who actually ran the operation walked free. The Xinhua syndicate had used the trash can strategy: let the small fish take the fall, bury the evidence so deep even God couldn't find it, and move on to the next city. She spent 2 years fighting. Lawyers who took her money and delivered nothing. Appeals that went nowhere. Bribes to guards just to make sure Marcus didn't end up dead in a prison riot. Her medical school savings evaporated. Her job at Detroit Receiving Hospital, the one good thing she'd clawed out of the dirt, ended when she got caught stealing surgical supplies to sell on the black market. Desperate people do desperate things. The night she lost her medical license, Iris sat in their empty apartment with a bottle of cheap whiskey and her laptop. She'd stopped crying months ago. Tears were a luxury for people who still had hope. What she had was rage, cold, patient, and surgical. She started researching. The Xinhua Syndicate wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a dynasty. The Li family had built an empire on legitimate business fronts and blood money, operating out of Seoul like kings. At the top sat Chairman Lee Hyun-soo, a man whose Wikipedia page read like a corporate fairy tale. Below him, his 3 sons. The eldest ran the legitimate holdings, the middle son handled political connections, and the youngest, Kangdae Lee, ran everything the family didn't want in the light. The Ice King, 32 years old, Harvard MBA, fluent in 6 languages, rumored to have personally executed 7 men before his 25th birthday. He didn't just inherit the syndicate's operations, he perfected them, turning crude smuggling routes into a sophisticated network that moved everything from weapons to white-collar criminals fleeing extradition. Iris studied his face until she could draw it from memory. The sharp jawline, the dead eyes, the way he stood in photographs, like he was calculating the net worth of everyone in the room. She bought a plane ticket to Seoul with money she'd saved by not eating, applied for housekeeping positions at every luxury building in Gangnam, learned enough Korean to pass as a native speaker's daughter, erased Iris Moon from Detroit, and became a ghost, invisible, forgettable, exactly the kind of woman powerful men never noticed. 6 months of scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. 6 months of silence and patience, waiting for the universe to give her an opening. Then she found him bleeding on his kitchen floor, and everything changed. Kangdae didn't thank her for saving his life. He didn't fire her, either. Instead, he moved her into the penthouse's guest wing, what he called the golden cage, with a smile that never reached his eyes. The room had its own bathroom, a bed that cost more than her childhood home, and a door that locked from the inside. A courtesy, he said. Protection, he meant. She was a liability now, someone who'd seen him vulnerable, and the Ice King didn't leave loose ends walking around. But he also didn't treat her like a prisoner. The penthouse became a strange purgatory where the rules kept shifting. She still cleaned, but now she also sat with him during meals when his advisors weren't present. She still kept her head down, but he asked her questions about Detroit, about medicine, about why she'd come to Seoul. She lied smoothly, feeding him half-truths wrapped in just enough honesty to pass inspection. He knew. She could see it in the way he watched her, like a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. The nights were worst. Kangdae didn't sleep much, insomnia or paranoia. She couldn't tell which. She'd find him in the library at 2 a.m., surrounded by leather-bound books in languages she couldn't read, nursing a glass of whiskey that never seemed to empty. The first time she joined him, uninvited, he raised an eyebrow but didn't send her away. They developed a routine. She'd brew tea, the expensive chrysanthemum blend he kept in jade containers, and sit in the chair across from his. No conversation required. Just the sound of turning pages and the Seoul skyline glittering beyond the windows like a circuit board. The silence between them became its own language. She noticed things about him that didn't fit the Ice King persona. The way he always poured her tea first. A gesture so automatic he didn't seem to realize he was doing it. The small scar above his left eyebrow that he touched when he was thinking. The fact that he read poetry, Yeats and Neruda and Kim Sowell books that seemed incompatible with a man who ordered executions over breakfast. "You're staring," he said one night without looking up from his book. "You're predictable," Iris replied, watching steam curl from her cup. "Same chair, same whiskey, same book of Neruda you've been reading for 3 weeks. His eyes flicked to hers. "Maybe I like the repetition. Or maybe you're afraid to finish it." She shouldn't have said it. But the darkness made her bold, and the sandalwood incense burning on his desk made everything feel dreamlike. Because then you'd have to choose something new, and choosing means vulnerability. Kangdae set the book down slowly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, reminded him that she was still just the help. Then he smiled. A real one. Quick and devastating. "You think you understand me, Doctor?" The title hit her like a slap. "I'm not. You held a scalpel for 7 years before they stripped your license. You diagnosed my stab wound in under 10 seconds. You knew exactly which muscle groups to avoid when you sutured me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman who saved my life?" Iris's pulse hammered against her throat. "Then why keep me here?" "Because I'm trying to decide." His gaze traveled across her face like he was reading a map. "Are you a ghost who stumbled into my life by accident? Or are you something far more interesting?" She should have looked away, should have remembered why she was here, what she'd come to destroy. Instead, she held his stare and felt the fault lines in her plan beginning to crack. "Maybe I'm both." His hand moved, not threatening, just deliberate, and his fingers brushed hers where they rested on the armchair. The contact was electric, nothing like the clinical touch of bandages and sutures. This was skin against skin, heat and intention, the kind of connection that rewrote the rules. Neither of them pulled away. "Careful, Iris." Her name in his mouth sounded like a warning and a promise. Ghosts who get too close to the fire end up burning. "Good thing I've got steady hands." They stayed like that until dawn, crept through the windows, 2 people caught in the gravitational pull of something neither could name. When she finally went to her room, her hand still tingled where he'd touched her. She was supposed to hate him. Instead, she was starting to forget why. The file was hidden behind a false panel in Kangdae's office, the kind of security measure that screamed classified. Iris found it by accident while dusting the mahogany bookshelf. Her fingers caught the edge of a seam that shouldn't exist. She should have walked away, should have remembered her place. But 7 weeks of living in the golden cage had made her reckless, and the late nights with tea and silence had made her forget that the man reading Neruda also signed death warrants. The panel clicked open. Inside, 3 ledgers, 2 passports with Kangdae's face and different names, and a manila folder labeled Detroit Shipment 2019. Her brother's year. Her family's destruction. Iris's hands shook as she opened it. Manifests. Shipping routes. FBI reports marked compromised. And there, in the margins of a handwritten note, the instruction that had destroyed everything. Let the dock worker take the fall. Clean sweep protocol. Chairman Lee Hyun-soo's signature at the bottom. But Kangdae's handwriting in the margin. Approved. Execute. The room tilted. 5 years of grief, rage, and desperation crystallized into a single, devastating truth. She'd been sleeping under the same roof as the man who'd signed off on her brother's imprisonment. Worse, She'd been letting him touch her hand in the darkness, letting herself imagine that maybe, somehow, he was different than the monster she'd come to destroy. "You're a better spy than I gave you credit for." Iris spun. Kangde stood in the doorway, perfectly still, his expression unreadable. No anger, no surprise, just that calculating gaze that saw through everything. "How long have you known?" Her voice came out steady, despite the blood roaring in her ears. "Since the night you saved me." He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, casual as a predator who knew the prey had nowhere to run. Iris Moon, formerly of Detroit Receiving Hospital. Sister of Marcus Moon, currently serving 25 years in federal prison for a crime he didn't commit. He paused. "A crime my family ensured he'd take the fall for." She wanted to scream, to attack him, to grab the letter opener on his desk and finish what the assassins at the gala had started. Instead, she stood frozen, the file clutched in her hands like evidence at a trial. "Why?" The words scraped out of her throat. "Why keep me here if you knew?" Kangde moved closer, each step deliberate. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do. Whether you'd try to kill me in my sleep, whether you'd seduce information out of me, whether you'd play the long game and wait for the perfect moment." He stopped 3 feet away. "You did none of those things. Instead, you made tea and argued about poetry and looked at me like I might be human. You're not." The file fell from her hands, pages scattering across imported Persian carpet. "You're the reason my brother rotted in a cell while your family got richer." Yes. No denial. No excuses. Just brutal honesty delivered in that calm, measured tone. "I approved the strategy. I signed the order. I watched the FBI reports and did nothing when they arrested the wrong man." His jaw tightened. "I was 27 and trying to prove to my father that I could be as ruthless as he needed me to be. Is that supposed to make me forgive you?" "No." He reached down and picked up the file, his movements careful. "It's supposed to make you understand that the man who signed that order isn't the same man standing in front of you now." He held the file out to her. "Take it. Every document in there is enough to free your brother and destroy my family's operation in North America." Iris stared at the offered file like it might explode. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." His smile was bitter. "You take this evidence, you save Marcus, and you make an enemy of the most dangerous criminal organization in Asia. They'll hunt you. They'll hunt him. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Or you burn it with me." He set the file on the desk between them. "We dismantle the syndicate from the inside. Slowly, carefully. We turn it into something that doesn't destroy families for profit. And when we're done, Marcus walks free without spending the rest of his life in witness protection." It was insane, impossible, a partnership with the devil himself. But when Iris looked at Kangde, really looked at him, she didn't see the Ice King. She saw a man who'd spent 5 years carrying the weight of a decision made by a younger, more desperate version of himself. A man who read Neruda in the dark because he couldn't sleep. A man who'd handed her the weapon to destroy him and called it a choice. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I'm not your maid. I'm not your prisoner. I'm your equal." "If you stay," he replied, "you become something far more dangerous. You become my conscience." The file sat between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Outside, Seoul hummed with oblivious life. A city that would never know the deal being struck in this room. Iris picked up the file. Kangde's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, hope or fear. She couldn't tell. She walked to the fireplace, held the manila folder over the flames, and looked back at him one last time. "If you lie to me again, I'll finish what that knife started." "Fair enough." She dropped the file into the fire and watched 5 years of evidence burn. Somewhere in Detroit, Marcus was eating prison food and dreaming of freedom. Somewhere in this penthouse, a ghost named Iris Moon made a choice that would either save them both or destroy everything. Kangde moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. They watched the flames devour the past together. Two broken people building something new from the ashes. "Welcome to the Empire, Doctor," he murmured. "Let's burn it down." The Blue Orchid Gala was designed to impress, but Director Park turned it into a slaughterhouse. Iris saw the first shooter before anyone else. Years of ER trauma had trained her to spot predators in a crowd. The man moved wrong, his gait too purposeful, his hand inside his jacket where no phone should be. She grabbed Kangdae's wrist and pulled him down just as the chandelier exploded. Glass rained like diamonds. Someone screamed. The orchestra stopped mid-note as men in black tactical gear poured through every entrance, automatic weapons raised. This wasn't a robbery. It was an execution. "The panic room," Kangdae barked, his hand already wrapped around her waist, dragging her toward the mansion's east wing. But the corridors were filling with smoke, and the tactical team knew the layout too well. They'd been given blueprints. This was an inside job. Iris's emerald gown, the one that had made her feel like royalty an hour ago, snagged on debris as they ran. She ripped the hem without thinking, her hands already reaching for the small medical kit she'd hidden in her clutch. Paranoia or instinct, it didn't matter now. They made it to the library before the first pursuer caught up. Young, efficient, the kind of hired killer who didn't waste words. He raised his weapon, finger on the trigger. Kangdae moved like violence, choreographed a sidestep, a disarm, a strike to the throat that dropped the man in 3 seconds flat. The gun clattered across hardwood. Blood sprayed from the guard's mouth. Kangdae didn't check if he was dead. He already knew. "How many?" Iris's voice was steady, clinical. The ER doctor kicking in. 8, confirmed inside. More outside, securing the perimeter. He checked the stolen weapon, 15 rounds. "They want me alive long enough to watch Park gloat. Then let's disappoint him." They moved through the mansion like smoke, using servant passages that Iris had memorized during the pre-gala tour. Kangdae fought with brutal efficiency, every movement, economy, every strike lethal. But numbers meant attrition, and by the time they reached the third-floor gallery, he was limping, blood seeping through his tailored pants. "You're hit?" Iris pushed him into an alcove behind a marble statue. "Grazed. Keep moving." "Shut up and let me look." She tore his pant leg, assessed the wound. Through and through, messy but non-lethal. She packed it with gauze from her kit, wrapped it tight enough to stop the bleeding. "You're welcome." His hand caught her chin, tilting her face up. "When this is over, remind me to hire you as my personal physician. When this is over, remind me to charge you triple." Footsteps echoed from both ends of the gallery. They were boxed in. Kangdae raised the stolen gun, calculated angles, counted bullets. The math didn't work. Then Iris saw him. Director Park emerged from the smoke like a ghost made flesh, flanked by 2 bodyguards. His silver hair was immaculate despite the chaos. His smile sharp enough to cut. He'd orchestrated this entire nightmare, and now he wanted his front row seat. "The prodigal son," Park called out, his voice carrying across the gallery. "And his little Detroit stray." How poetic. Kangdae's finger tightened on the trigger. "You knew the consequences of betrayal." "Consequences?" Park laughed, the sound brittle. "Your father built this syndicate on consequences. I'm simply collecting what's owed." His gaze slid to Iris, sharp and assessing. "Tell me, does the Ice King know his precious doctor came here to destroy him? That her brother is rotting in prison because of our Detroit operation?" The gallery went silent except for the distant sound of sirens. Iris felt Kangdae's body go rigid beside her, but she didn't look at him. Couldn't. "He knows," she said clearly. "He's always known." Park's smile faltered. "Then you're both fools." He raised his weapon, an antique revolver, because of course he'd be theatrical about murder. Time slowed. Kangdae moved to shield her. The bodyguards raised their automatics. Iris's hand closed around the syringe in her kit. She'd grabbed it from the penthouse that morning, animal-grade sedative, the kind used on aggressive dogs in emergency situations, enough to drop a 150-pound man in under 30 seconds. She'd taken it on instinct, a doctor's paranoia about worst-case scenarios. Now it became their salvation. She moved before thought could stop her, closing the distance to Park in 4 running steps. His bodyguards tracked her movement but hesitated. She was just a woman in a torn dress, not a threat. That hesitation cost them everything. Iris drove the syringe into Park's neck and pressed the plunger. His eyes went wide with shock. The revolver discharged into the ceiling. His bodyguards lurched forward, but Kangday was already firing. 2 precise shots that dropped them both. Park crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, the sedative flooding his system. Iris stood over him, chest heaving, the empty syringe still clutched in her hand. "That was for Marcus," she said quietly, "and every other person you destroyed." Kangday limped to her side, his hand finding the small of her back. "Remind me never to make you angry." Too late. Police poured into the gallery moments later, the legitimate kind, not the ones on Park's payroll. Kangday had made one call before the chaos started, triggered protocols that would shift the narrative. By morning, the news would report a failed assassination attempt on prominent businessman Kangday Lee. Director Park would be in custody, his betrayal exposed. The syndicate would survive. It always did. But as Iris stood in the wreckage of the Blue Orchid Gala, blood on her dress and sedative residue on her hands, she realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She wasn't just a ghost seeking revenge. She was something new, something dangerous. She was his equal. They didn't speak during the drive back to the penthouse. Kangday's jaw was wired shut with tension, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was strangling it. Iris watched Soul blur past the window, her mind replaying Park's words on an endless loop. Does the Ice King know his precious doctor came here to destroy him? The penthouse felt different when they entered, smaller, airless, like a tomb waiting to be sealed. Kangday poured 2 glasses of whiskey with mechanical precision, handed her one without meeting her eyes. "Say it," Iris demanded. "Whatever you're thinking, just say it." He drank instead of answering. The silence stretched like a blade. "I knew you came here for revenge." His voice was flat, emotionless, the Ice King reasserting control. "I knew you wanted to destroy everything I'd built. What I didn't know—" He stopped, the glass trembling in his hand. "I didn't know if you'd stay after you got what you wanted. I burned the evidence." She set her untouched whiskey on the table. "I made my choice." "Did you?" He finally looked at her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. "Or did you just decide revenge was less satisfying than you imagined?" The accusation stung because it held a kernel of truth. But Iris hadn't survived Detroit by accepting other people's narratives. "You want the truth?" She closed the distance between them, forcing him to hold her gaze. "I came here to watch you burn. I spent 6 months cleaning your floors and imagining all the ways I could destroy you. And then you went and complicated everything by being human. I'm not. You read poetry you don't understand and drink tea you don't taste and carry guilt like a second skeleton." Her hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath expensive fabric. "You handed me the weapon to end you and called it a choice. You knew I wanted you dead, and you trusted me to save your life anyway." His hand covered hers, holding it in place. "That doesn't absolve me of what I did to your family." "No," she agreed. "Nothing absolves you. But maybe we're both tired of carrying our dead alone." The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. Neither of them moved. The penthouse held its breath. "I can free him," Kangday said finally. "Your brother. I have connections in the federal system that Park never knew about. Judges who owe favors. Prosecutors who can be persuaded. If we move carefully, Marcus could be out in 6 months." Iris's vision blurred. "What's the price?" "There's always a price." His thumb traced the pulse point in her wrist. "I dismantle my father's empire, piece by piece. We salt the earth so thoroughly that the Xinhua syndicate becomes a cautionary tale. And when it's done, when the ashes settle, I lose everything. My family, my name, my place in a world I've known since birth. And you'd do that? For me? I'd do it for us." His forehead rested against hers, the gesture more intimate than any kiss. "Because the alternative is watching you leave. And I've discovered I'm far too selfish to survive that." Iris's hands slid up his chest, around his neck, pulling him closer. Then we burn it together. All of it. But we do it right, no half measures, no mercy for the people who built their fortunes on broken families. You'll make enemies. I'll make a statement. His laugh was broken. Beautiful. My father will disown me. The syndicate will put a price on my head. We'll spend years dismantling something that took decades to build. Good. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I didn't come all this way to settle for half a revolution. Kangde reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. Every transaction, every operation, every politician and judge on the payroll. Enough evidence to collapse the organization from the inside. You've been planning this since the night you saved me. He pressed the drive into her palm. I just needed someone to make it worth the cost. Iris closed her fingers around the drive, feeling the weight of dynasties in her hand. Outside, Seoul sparkled like a promise and a threat. Inside, two people stood at the edge of something that would either redeem them or destroy them both. One condition, she said. When this is over, when Marcus is free and your family's empire is dust, we do this. She gestured between them. We do this honestly. No ghosts, no Ice King. Just two people trying to build something that doesn't require body counts. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn. She kissed him hard, tasting whiskey and desperation and the first fragile shoots of something like hope. Because I didn't cross an ocean to fall in love with a monster. He froze. You love me? I'm working on hating myself less for it. She pulled away. The USB drive clutched between them like a talisman. Now, call your contacts. Get my brother out. And tomorrow, we start the endgame. Kangde made the calls that night while Iris stood on the balcony, watching the city that had become her battleground and her home. The wind carried the smell of rain and possibility. Somewhere in a Detroit prison, Marcus was sleeping, dreaming of freedom he didn't know was coming. And in a Seoul penthouse, a ghost and a king made a covenant written in blood and sealed with the promise of destruction. The revolution had begun. Detroit looked smaller than Iris remembered. She stood outside the Federal Corrections Facility in the gray November morning, wearing jeans and a jacket that didn't cost more than dinner, her sole wardrobe abandoned for the ghost she used to be. The past 6 months had been a surgical dismantling of the Xinhua syndicate accounts, frozen, operations exposed, arrests that rippled through the organization like a controlled demolition. But none of it mattered as much as this moment. The prison doors opened. Marcus emerged blinking into the sunlight, thinner than she remembered, older in ways that had nothing to do with time. His eyes found her across the parking lot, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then he was running, and she was running, and they collided in the middle, like planets finally finding orbit. Iris. Her name in his voice sounded like prayer and accusation. They said you. I didn't think. I know. She held him tighter, feeling bones where muscle used to be. I know. I'm here. You're out. It's over. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face like he needed proof she was real. How? The lawyer said the evidence just appeared. Appeals that should have taken years got fast-tracked. Someone with serious power wanted me out. Iris's throat tightened. Someone owed us a debt. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He'd always been too smart for comfort. What did you do, Iris? The letters you sent? The money that showed up in my commissary account? Where did it come from? Does it matter? She tried for her old smile, the one that used to reassure him. You're free. That's all that counts. It matters if you sold yourself to get me out. His voice cracked. It matters if my freedom cost you everything. She couldn't lie to him. Not after all this time. I went to Seoul. I found the people responsible for what happened to you, and I made them pay. Seoul. He said the word like a curse. The syndicate. Jesus. Iris. Tell me you didn't. I did exactly what I had to do. She stepped back, creating distance for what came next. I infiltrated their operation. I got close to someone who could make things right. And when the time came, I chose to dismantle them instead of just burning it all down. Marcus's face cycled through disbelief, horror, and something worse, pity. You crossed an ocean to destroy the people who framed me, and now what? You just come back to Detroit and pretend the last 5 years didn't happen? I don't know. The admission hurt. I came here for you, to see you walk free, to know that at least one thing I destroyed actually got rebuilt. At what cost? He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. I know that look, Iris. That's the same look you had when Mom died, and you decided you had to fix everything alone. What did you become to get me out? The truth sat on her tongue like poison. She could tell him about the penthouse and the tea ceremonies and the nights spent planning a syndicate's downfall. She could tell him about Kang Day, about falling for the man who'd approved his imprisonment, about building something new from the wreckage of their shared guilt. But Marcus had spent 5 years in a cage because of her choices. He deserved a sister who was uncomplicated, who came home clean. I became someone who doesn't fit here anymore, she said quietly. Someone who knows how to suture knife wounds and negotiate with criminals and drink tea that costs more than our first car. I came back to see you free, Marcus, but I can't stay. His hands dropped. Soul. Soul. There's someone, not a question, an observation from the brother who'd always seen through her. There's someone, she confirmed. Someone who's trying to become better than he was. Someone who gave me the keys to his empire and asked me to help him burn it down. And you trust him? Skepticism and concern warred in his expression. I trust us. Iris pulled an envelope from her jacket, pressed it into his hands. Enough money to start over. A contact in the auto restoration business who needs a genius mechanic. And a phone number that will always reach me, no matter what. Marcus opened the envelope, saw the numbers, and went pale. This is blood money, she finished. Seized from syndicate accounts. Think of it as reparations. He stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Then he looked at his sister, really looked at her, seeing the changes written in the set of her shoulders and the hardness in her eyes. You're not coming back, are you? Not really. I'm not the girl who left Detroit. Iris touched his cheek. But I'm your sister. That doesn't change, no matter how many oceans are between us. They stood in the prison parking lot as morning gave way to afternoon. Two people trying to reconcile the gap between who they'd been and who survival had forced them to become. When they finally said goodbye, Marcus held her like he was memorizing the shape of her, and Iris let herself be held like the ghost she'd once been. Be careful, he whispered against her hair. Whoever this person is, whatever you're building, be careful. I'm always careful, she lied. She watched him drive away in the car she'd arranged for him, watched Detroit swallow him back into the life she'd paid for with pieces of her soul. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. Kang Day answered on the first ring. Is he safe? He's home. Her voice shook. And I'm ready to come back. A pause. Then, soft enough to break her. I've been waiting. Iris booked a flight for that evening. As the plane lifted off from Detroit Metro, she watched her city shrink beneath her. All those memories and ghosts getting smaller with altitude. She didn't know if she was running towards something or away from everything. But when the plane touched down in Seoul 15 hours later, and she saw Kang Day waiting at arrivals with that careful expression he wore when he was trying not to hope, Iris finally understood. She wasn't running at all. She was choosing. And that made all the difference. The clinic opened on a Tuesday. Iris Moon, MD license reinstated through Kang Day's connections, and a carefully orchestrated legal miracle, hung the shingle herself in one of Seoul's forgotten neighborhoods. The building was small, sandwiched between a convenience store and a laundromat, but it was hers. The waiting room held 6 chairs. The examination room had equipment that would make most hospitals jealous. And the file cabinet in her office contained records of patients who existed in the city's margins, people who couldn't go to official hospitals because they didn't officially exist. The untraceable, the forgotten, the ones the system had failed. She saw 17 patients the first day. A construction worker with a shattered hand who couldn't afford workers' comp. A teenage girl with infected piercings her parents couldn't know about. An elderly man with diabetes who'd been living in a subway station for 3 years. Iris treated them all with the same precision she'd once reserved for Detroit ER trauma cases, asking no questions beyond the medical, accepting payment in whatever form they could offer. By the end of the first week, word had spread through the underground. The doctor who didn't ask for ID, the clinic that didn't report gunshot wounds, the woman who spoke Korean with a Detroit accent and understood that survival sometimes meant staying invisible. She was exactly where she needed to be. The penthouse, when she returned each night, felt different now. Kangdae had downsized his operations, cutting ties with the syndicate's most brutal divisions, redirecting money into legitimate holdings. It was slow work, dangerous work. His father had disowned him. His middle brother had put a price on his head, and the Spider Clan still sent occasional reminders that betrayal had consequences. But they were building something new from the ashes. She found him on the balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker like a circuit board. He looked older than 32, the weight of dismantling a dynasty aging him in ways that had nothing to do with time. Iris slid her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his spine. "Rough day?" she murmured. "3 more accounts frozen. My father's lawyers are threatening lawsuits, and someone left a very polite death threat on the kitchen counter." He covered her hands with his. "So, standard Tuesday. We could run, take the money we've hidden and disappear." "You don't mean that." "No," she admitted. "But I thought I'd offer the option." He turned in her arms, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that still surprised her. The Ice King had thawed completely, leaving behind a man who looked at her like she was the only warm thing in his universe. "The clinic," he said. "How many today?" 23. Including a woman who'd been beaten by her husband, and a kid with an asthma attack whose family couldn't afford an ambulance. Iris leaned into his touch. "I saved them. All of them. That's my doctor." Pride colored his voice, warm and genuine. "Saving the world, one untraceable patient at a time." "Our world," she corrected. "I didn't cross an ocean to save people alone." Kangdae kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth, slow and deliberate, like he was memorizing the geography of her. When they pulled apart, the Seoul skyline stretched behind them, a city that had become theirs through blood and choice. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Iris raised an eyebrow. "If that's a ring, we need to have a serious conversation about your timing." "It's not a ring." He opened the box to reveal a key, old brass, worn with age. "It's the key to my father's original office in Gangnam. The building is mine now, legally seized during the asset freeze. I thought," he hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features, "I thought you could open a second clinic there, something bigger, a place where people can get the care they deserve, without choosing between treatment and rent." Iris stared at the key, her throat tight. "You're giving me a building. I'm giving you an empire." He pressed the key into her palm. "The Xinhua Syndicate is dead. Let's build something better in its place. Clinics, community centers, programs that help people instead of exploiting them." His smile was crooked, self-aware. "I was very good at destroying things. Let's see if I'm equally talented at creation." She kissed him hard enough to bruise, the key clutched between them like a talisman. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "You're going to make a terrible philanthropist," she said, laughing through tears. "Too much guilt, not enough PR spin. Then it's good I have you to keep me honest." They stood on the balcony as night deepened around them, two people who'd found each other in blood and silence and built something improbable from the wreckage. The city sprawled below them, millions of lives intersecting, each with their own ghosts and redemptions. Iris thought about Marcus in Detroit, rebuilding engines and maybe, slowly, rebuilding himself. She thought about the patients who'd sat in her waiting room, trusting her with lives the system had discarded. She thought about the girl she'd been desperate, angry, willing to destroy everything for revenge. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly what she'd become. "Dr. Moon," Kangdae said softly, using the title like an endearment. "Queen of Shadows." builder of sanctuaries, the woman who tamed the Ice King. I didn't tame you. Iris laced her fingers through his. I just reminded you that you were human. Same thing. They watched the sun rise over Seoul together. Two people who'd survived their own destruction and chosen each other anyway. The clinic would open in a few hours. The threats would continue. The work of dismantling an empire and building something better would take years. But for now, in this moment, they were exactly where they needed to be. Together, equal, free, and that was enough.